Hello and welcome to this Serial Geek TV episode commentary for Island of Fear, an episode of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe produced by Filmation Studios. I remember watching this episode as a kid and thoroughly enjoying it. However, as an adult, it's one of those episodes you watch back and say, not in a negative way, but because this episode, as you'll see, has so much potential right from the get-go. And whilst it succeeds in some places, it truly falters in others. If I can remember to, during this commentary, I'll point out the scenes that were edited out for time during the original UK broadcast because I can still recall exactly where they were. The script for this episode was approved on March the 15th, 1984, with the final revision made on May the 7th, 1984. That is actually a rather fast turnaround for an episode. This episode starts off with something not seen on the other 129 episodes of He-Man or the 93 episodes of She-Ra, a joint director's credit shared between Bill Reed and Lou Zukor. I'd love to know more about the production of this episode to understand why it warranted two directors. It's not like the episode is anything of note visually, and that's no disrespect to the episode, it's just an odd thing to see. The writer of this episode, Anthony Zalewski, he was one of very few writers that actually penned an episode of the New Adventures of He-Man, and he actually penned one of the most memorable, but that is an episode commentary for another time. This episode opens with a terrific panning shot of the newly built Great Eternian Dam, and it's a refreshing break from the Royal Palace and Snake Mountain because that's where most episodes begin. The dam is also a great showcase of Man-at-Arms' engineering abilities. So often we only think of his skills in terms of the small inventions and useful gadgets he creates, but this episode proves that the Master of Weapons can accomplish enormous tasks as well. So I've already mentioned that this episode, as entertaining as it is, does falter at times, with scene stagnation being a problem, resulting in more than one scene having a somewhat meandering feeling, and we're soon to see one of the earliest examples. Here we see Cringer and Orko get bored and decide to leave the festivities when, out of nowhere, Cringer almost falls over the edge of the Great Eternian Dam. It's really odd because we fully expect some big scene where He-Man comes to the rescue of the cowardly cat, but instead, Orko simply pulls his friend to safety. What's the point of this scene? It serves no purpose whatsoever. Even Prince Adam pulling Cringer by the tail would have been a better payoff, maybe with Orko quickly disappearing so that it appears that Cringer got himself into this predicament on his own.
Come, Duncan, now we have to deal with the bad news.
Okay, so when this episode was first broadcast in the UK, as soon as King Randor had said, now we have to deal with the bad news, it jump cut to the He-Man transitional logo, so we lost all of this subplot about the fact that the Great Eternian Dam has taken up land on where the children once played, and that the wildlife park was forced to close. For He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, this is a very interesting plot because often the lives of those within Eternos outside of the villainous threats seems to be without conflict. But here, well, this is a rather political issue for the Eternians, and it's kind of a shame that it's not the main plot of the episode because I'd argue that it's far more intriguing than the main plot, that of the Island of Fear. But at least the premise that whenever some sort of engineering marvel is built, the environment suffers is addressed, even if it is brief and later quite effortlessly resolved. And who do we have in this scene? It's the first appearance of one of the newest heroic warriors, Buzz-Off. Oddly, even though this is his first appearance in the series, he's not shoved down our throats. His appearance feels very natural, as if he has always been one of the kingdom's allies. And this meeting, it does feel rather unique. A private meeting in which important figures in the kingdom discuss something, the disappearance of numerous cargo ships, that they deem not worth alerting the public to just yet. When you think about it, this really is a very political episode of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. And it's nice to see Prince Adam present in a very important meeting. Actually, this episode is particularly strong for Adam, who appears as He-Man as little as possible during the story. Going back to that scene with Prince Adam, King Randor and Buzz-Off, it is somewhat similar to the opening scene from City Beneath the Sea, in which Man-at-Arms and King Randor converse with Orn about the same problem. While these two episodes may seem to have the same plot on the surface, their stories are very different in reality. One of the strongest elements of this episode is that its plot is strikingly original, but we'll get to that later. Like he does in A Trip to Morania, Adam takes charge of a mission on behalf of his kingdom, and throughout most of the upcoming island scenes, Adam is the leader alongside Teela of the exploration, making decisions that affect the others. Perhaps this is an attempt to prove himself to his father? He does seem to be accepting more responsibility. And Prince Adam's aerobatics with the Wind Raider result in him stumbling upon the mysterious floating island, quite literally. As a kid, and heck, even now, this was one of my favourite action scenes, as we're about to see some intense drama. It's actually quite a terrifying scene because the threat of drowning is a rather awful situation to be in. And I love the shot of Man-at-Arms holding onto the structure as Cringer yells out to Adam, with the He-Man theme song kicking in.
By the power of Grayskull!
Yes, here we go, the most powerful man in the universe, racing into action. This action scene is beautifully staged and directed. We can, of course, only hear the noise of the water, which heightens the drama. No He-Man quips here. I love this show of strength. Against the immense pressure of the flow of water, He-Man uses his mighty leg muscles to propel himself, Man-at-Arms and Cringer out of the water and into the air. The scene was originally going to be a tad comical, with He-Man, whilst flying through the air holding onto Man-at-Arms and Cringer, remarking to himself, "Now all we need is a place to land." It's a shame that line was removed, and yes, before you mention it, the length of Buzz-Off's arms when he reaches to grab He-Man are ridiculous. Also, one has to point out, Buzz-Off must have above average strength, as he's carrying He-Man, Man-at-Arms and a giant tiger. One thing I should point out, all of the backgrounds for the island in this episode are the same as those used for Dragosaur Isle in the Season 1 episode The Time Corridor. Even the main shot of the island that we have already seen, that was Dragosaur Isle. Now, here's where the episode starts to falter. Whilst I love seeing our heroes explore a completely new location, and whilst Filmation do a fantastic job of setting the mood and atmosphere, it all feels very drawn out. Every painstaking moment of exploration seems to have been preserved on film, with at least a full minute of the characters wandering around on screen. A few moments of this would have been ample time to establish setting and atmosphere, but the scene extends itself far past what is required. That said, the environment of the island is one of the most appealing things about Island of Fear. We get a vast array of colours on this island. The sheer brilliance of reds, purples and greens permeates every scene, and with the colourful characters presented to us, everyone seems to leap from the screen against this pigment-filled backdrop of the island. Sadly, throughout numerous scenes, the script, as in the dialogue, really does come across rather problematic. Writer Anthony Zaluski, who had a hit with the Season 2 episode Hunt for He-Man, doesn't seem to have a firm grasp of such a big cast as seen in this particular episode. While he does deserve credit for this original story, it's hard to redeem some rather poor dialogue at times. We're fast approaching the first example.
I have a bad feeling about this.
You'll soon hear Man-at-Arms repeat this line, and it's indicative of the story's worst dialogue pattern, as every character seems to announce something terrible is going to happen before it does. Orko does it later, as does Teela too. It's an odd choice for a writer to make. And speaking of odd choices, whilst amusing, the word chumps is far too commonplace for Eternia. I'd like to think of Skeletor being a tad more creative in his writing.
By the power of
Prince Adam losing the Sword of Power is always something that'll make the plot a great deal more interesting, but there is a big problem with it on this occasion, something I'll come back to later. Act 1 of the episode originally ended with Prince Adam and Man-at-Arms carried at breathtaking speed by the torrent deep into the island's underground lair, whereas in the actual completed episode, Skeletor and his master plan are revealed first. And now our heroes begin to take in their surroundings, a huge underground lair, and the missing cargo ships. And remember I mentioned the dialogue? Well, Man-at-Arms is going to tell us again that
I have a bad feeling about this.
I mean, yeah, he's not wrong, but we don't need to hear about his bad feeling every single time. You may want to go to the royal physician doctor and get that bad feeling checked out, Man-at-Arms. And now we have Skeletor flanked by the evil warrior duo that we never knew we wanted, Merman and Whiplash. The Lord of Destruction operates with his usual evilness throughout the story, but he does not hold our attention. In fact, Merman and Whiplash are the scene stealers with their amusing rivalry. So often Skeletor's allies talk about wanting to overthrow him, but in this instance, the villains are only squabbling over who can please him more. This is perhaps the only instance since the Season 1 episode The Search, in which Merman and Beastman bicker over who will be second in command, that Skeletor's allies have vied for the title of most favoured. What their little contest amounts to is chuckling and laughter after each one of Skeletor's jokes, even if the joke is not funny, and even if it is not a joke. They try to outdo each other in compliments.
Skeletor, even you couldn't be that cruel. But I can!
Pairing these two villains together is sheer brilliance. Merman and Whiplash represent the two most single-minded villains in Skeletor's arsenal. Each appears by himself in several episodes, proving his individuality. Such narrow-thinking villains only make for humour when they are teamed up, as on this occasion. Neither likes having to work with one another, and the mutual hatred makes for some delicious screen moments. And a rather lengthy Act 1 comes to an end with Skeletor very much having the upper hand. Act 2 begins, and no, again, this isn't Dragosaur Isle as seen in the time corridor, this is the mysterious floating island. Interestingly, Teela here recognises the Sword of Power as Prince Adam's sword, not He-Man's, even though she has seen the most powerful man in the universe wield the legendary weapon throughout many of their adventures together. Here we get to see one of Buzz-Off's powers in action, his goggles that provide an X-ray vision of sorts, kind of like Triclops' gamma vision. So, if you'll allow me to deviate for a second, did you know that at one point Filmation planned for Buzz-Off to have a son? So, the Season 2 He-Man and the Masters of the Universe series Bible, written by the late, great Larry DiTillio, details how the new characters could be established in the series. These stories could be adhered to by the writers, turned into origins told in flashback, or even ignored completely. Buzz-Off's story is wonderful. Have no fear, we're not going to miss anything in Island of Fear. For the next 4 or so minutes, it's just characters walking around. Now, Buzz-Off's origin of sorts. Once, on a diplomatic call, Teela and Man-at-Arms were flying back from Targa when Man-at-Arms got a peculiar signal over his radar scanner. The signal was coming from an uncharted portion of the evergreen forest. Not leaving anything to chance, they decide to investigate. Moments later, to their amazement, the visual monitor reveals what looks like a very young half-humanoid child, half-bee. It appears to be fleeing a Dracos, a huge dragon-like creature that forage on anything that moves. Using the Wind Raider's laser stun, the Dracos is driven away and the youngster rescued. Searching the area for the youngster's home soon reveals the rest of the story. Not far from the spot, high above the forest, nestled neatly in the tops of the 200-foot manor vines, Man-at-Arms and Teela find the frightened young child's home. Somehow, the youngster decided to venture out of his home before he was physically able to, and fell to the dark depths of the forest below. With the warrior males and their leader Buzz-Off gone, the rest of the colony had to watch in terror as the youngster tried to escape. As Man-at-Arms and Teela return the youngster, Buzz-Off and his warriors return to the colony. Told what happened and how the two strangers saved the child, Buzzoff told them he would forever be in their debt. The child was his son. How about that? The story then goes on to talk about the origin of Buzzoff's race and their connection to the sands of time. At some point on this channel, I really do need to cover the Season 2 series Bible for the planned new characters alone, like Zorko and Corko, and Shark Girl. And no, I'm not kidding.
They're just using one of our ventilation ducts to reach the underground base.
A great, highly memorable scene coming up here between Merman and Whiplash. I mentioned before just how these two hated one another, and we're about to see that perfectly. Alan Oppenheimer as Merman and John Irwin as Whiplash, truly delivering the goods.
If you step on my tail one more time,
That stupid tail is getting in the way. Let me go first.
following your fishy smell will destroy my sensitive nose.
Oh, stop whining.
So good.
Looks like we hit pay dirt.
Oddly, even though I'm not always a fan of Earth-based colloquialisms, I love Teela's use of pay dirt. For those that don't know, the term comes from, I guess, the mid-1800s during the California gold rush. Pay dirt referring to an area that miners would find teeming with gold. Probably a term that should be used in Brave Star, and probably was.
And man at arms.
Nice little action scene coming up here. I do like how Cringer attributes seeing his dear friends as visions before realising, no, it's really them. And let's be honest, Skeletor's imprisoning of both Prince Adam and Man-at-Arms is rather inspired, placing them in a sphere underwater. And the shot of Adam waving at Cringer, how fantastic a visual is that?
It is them! It really is!
And now, as I said, a nice little action scene here with Teela leaping in to save the day. And I love that the captain of the Royal Guard possesses a lightsaber device that emerges from her bracer. Superb animation too, very expressive. Goodness, I'd love to stumble upon the line art of that one day. And now, remember how I talked about there being a problem with Prince Adam losing the Sword of Power in this particular episode? Well, it's because it's kind of a useless plot element. The writer places it in the episode to make Adam's predicament seem that much worse. But the truth of the matter is that Skeletor never really gives him the opportunity to transform into He-Man, even if he wants to. Only when imprisoned in the sphere could maybe have given Adam the opportunity to call upon the power of Grayskull, but we don't see that, so it's, as I said, kind of pointless. That's a great shot of Skeletor. It's a shame he's not wielding the Havoc Staff. I guarantee somewhere in the world someone owns that animation cell and has no clue as to why Skeletor is holding a giant yellow key. And after all the exploring of the mysterious floating island, we finally get the heroes and the villains face off. Fun little fact, when I was working on the Masters of the Universe classics, specifically the Filmation related figures, of course, the laser guns that both Merman and Whiplash wield were released with the Merman action figure. And 11 minutes since we last saw He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe returns.
Skeletor has the key.
Right.
As a kid, I adored this finale. I like the way He-Man acrobatically, almost effortlessly reaches Skeletor's vantage point, and even uses the Sword of Power to disarm the Lord of Destruction. I always chuckle at the way Skeletor destroys the key. Just watch. Here's the question I have. Is Skeletor really that strong, or was the key made out of paper mache or something? That said, it's kind of epic with He-Man confronting Skeletor and then, in a race against time, using all of his might to stop the island from its designated collision course with the Great Eternian Dam. Throughout this finale, Orko is acting as a sidekick, allowing He-Man to bounce his dialogue off of, rather than the most powerful man in the universe using an inner monologue. Not that he hasn't used an inner monologue before, although he doesn't have as prominent an inner monologue as the Lord of the Thundercats, Lion-O. And hurrah, the island stops in its tracks. This explosion at the end never seems quite believable. He-Man knocks down the turbine that operates the engine, then it just keeps spinning and spinning, He-Man declares it will blow up, so of course it does. The situation seems somewhat forced. Nicely animated explosion though, I will give them that. So, as I mentioned at the start of this commentary, as with all UK episode airings, at least initial airings, the episodes were often edited for time. Sometimes this would lead to some rather interesting takes on the episode, because we're about to see a comical scene with Skeletor atop the shoulders of both Merman and Whiplash. When this episode originally aired, as soon as Skeletor says, "mush, mush,"
Mush! Mush!
the end credits began, meaning that we didn't get this end scene or the moral segment. What is interesting about that is that it meant that we never saw the subplot, that of the newly built dam taking away land from the children and wildlife. Teela now suggests that Skeletor's island could become the nature reserve that the dam eliminated when it was built. The solution is a nice way to end the episode and proves that both technology and nature can coexist. I would say that it's one of the more overlooked subplots of the entire series. And I love this little cheer that the heroes give. It never fails to bring a smile to my face. This lesson of both technology and nature coexisting is expounded upon in the moral segment. Teela tells viewers that progress sometimes brings forth changes that require trees to be taken down so buildings can be put up. Prince Adam adds that this means that we should set aside land for nature reserves and other areas to preserve the wild. It is a well-delivered moral, as our heroes advocate compromise and understanding rather than one extreme position over another. Island of Fear. This story comes close to being one of the great action-adventure episodes of the second season, but just misses out. This is mainly due to the dialogue throughout, which is just not very good. The one thing worth noting is that Skeletor's plan in this episode is impressive. Although he is not written at his best, the villain does get some very good dialogue which emphasises his cruelty. The action scenes and unique setting make this a memorable episode, but with some decent character writing, it could have been one of the best. And that's the end of this episode commentary. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.